Ever feel like your lens isn't giving you the sharpness you expected? Maybe you've got a top-tier prime or a pro-level zoom, but your shots still come out a little soft. The problem isn't always the lens, it's how you're using it. Today, I'm breaking down exactly how to get the sharpest photos with any lens, whether you shoot primes, zooms, budget glass, or pro gear. I'll also share my list, or Mark's list, rather, of the sharpest lenses you can buy without breaking the bank. Let's get into it. First up, you're gonna wanna find your lens's sweet spot. Not every aperture is created equal. If you're having trouble with sharpness, it's important to know your lens's sharpest aperture range. You might want to avoid shooting wide open. Most lenses are soft at their widest aperture, like f1.4. So stopping down 1 or 2 stops to 2.8 or f4 can make a huge difference. For maximum sharpness, you might shoot at f5.6 to f8. This is the sharpest range for most lenses, balancing depth of field and diffraction. And don't go too narrow. At f16 or f22, diffraction softens the image. Great for depth of field, not so much for sharpness. And don't take any of these tips as constraints. I often shoot my lenses wide open. Instead, these tips are just to try out if you're struggling with sharpness specifically. Higher end lenses will perform better at the extremes than the budget lenses. So if you're using a kit lens, learning its sharpest aperture range is most important. Next up, master focus for each lens type. Your focus technique might change depending on the lens that you're using. Generally, you'll want to use some of the tips from my previous videos in this sharpness series, so go back and watch those if you haven't already. If you have some of the nicer, sharper lenses, you might not have to worry about some of this as much, but it's important to understand it, so let's go through it. For prime lenses, if you're shooting prime because you like bokeh and you want to shoot low aperture, know that you'll have a shallow depth of field and need to really nail that focus. Use single point autofocus and lock focus on your subject's eyes if it's a portrait or maybe the most detailed and contrasty part of your scene otherwise. It can't hurt to take a few shots or double check your focus before moving on. Even if your photography partner will tell you not to chimp at your camera, I'd rather deal with the teasing than not get the shot. Not that this ever happens to me. For zoom lenses, be aware that some zooms are sharper at certain focal lengths, so test your lens to find its best range, or look it up online. This might not change which focal length you want to shoot at, but being aware of this will help you debug any sharpness problems that you're having. For wide-angle lenses, these have a deep depth of field, but they can still miss focus. You can use autofocus and take a test shot, or you can try pre-focusing at the hyperfocal distance. You can keep your subject near the center of your frame, or at least away from the edges. Check out a hyperfocal distance calculator online. You can put in your lens and your aperture, and it gives you a hyperfocal distance, which tells you where to focus to get the maximum depth of field, making it sharp through a wide range of distances. For telephoto lenses, longer focal lengths magnify any mistake. So use those fast shutter speeds, use tripod support, image stabilization in order to compensate. Another tool is using focus peaking, which is available on mirrorless cameras and will show you what is going to be sharp with each lens. Number 3, use the right shutter speed for sharpness. Your shutter speed plays a huge role in image clarity, so follow the reciprocal rule. Keep your shutter speed at least 1 over the focal length to avoid motion blur. A 200mm lens, for example, needs to be at least 1 over 200 seconds or faster. For handheld shooting, play it safe and go even faster, 1 over 500 seconds, for example, if you're shooting without stabilization. For moving subjects, start at 1 over 1,000 seconds or faster for action sports. I recently shot a skier who was so fast he was hard to capture even at 1 over 6,400. He was more like a race car. It's time to talk about the best lenses for sharpness. Since this is gear recommendations and my eyes will start to glaze over, I'm going to turn this over to Mark.
All right, it's time to talk about the best lenses for getting sharp photos. Some lenses are just naturally sharper than others. Here's my top recommendations if you want the sharpest images possible without spending a fortune. I'll link to all these lenses in the description below, as well as in the blog post that we are going to put up. And as you know, those affiliate links help us out, so we appreciate it. I'll talk through the Canon and Sony choices for primes and zooms and telephotos, and I'll list some budget options as well. It's tricky to balance price and quality, but I'm giving you our opinion for the sharpest lenses you can buy without breaking the bank. So first up, let's talk 35mm lenses. We like the 35mm Sony f1.8. It's not as sharp as the 1.4 version, but still quite good and gives you a lot more bang for your buck. For Canon, the 35mm f1.8 is also good, but still not as sharp as the f1.4 version, but better on your wallet. For 50mm lenses, we like the Sony 50mm f1.4. It's a solid 50mm lens, and you'll pay for the quality on this one, but it's not quite as sharp as the 1.2, which is $700 more expensive. In the budget section below, I'll talk about the Samyang. For Canon, the 50mm f1.4 is an awesome and very sharp lens. All right, let's talk 85mm lenses. The Sony 85mm f1.4 G Master 2 is the version 2 of this lens, which is even sharper and lighter weight. For Canon, the 85mm f1.4 is quite sharp, but also expensive. I'll mention a budget option below. In terms of wide-angle zoom lenses, for Sony, I really like the 16 to 35mm f2.8 G Master 2. Version 2 is even smaller, lighter, and sharper than the original. For Canon, I like the 15 to 35mm f2.8. It's an excellent lens, and even though it's been out for a while, it's still a premium lens. For mid-range zooms, the Sony 24 to 70mm f2.8 G Master 2. Again, the version 2, sharper, lighter, and even better than the version 1. For Canon, the 24 to 70 f2.8, it's a great zoom lens with excellent sharpness. In terms of telephoto zoom lenses, I like the Sony 70 to 200mm f2.8 G Master 2. Again, version 2, better, sharper, lighter weight. For Canon, the 70 to 200mm f2.8. It's pricey, but it has very good image quality, and when you need a telephoto lens, this is a great choice. All right, let's talk some budget lenses with good sharpness. I'll be honest, these are the ones that we often choose, and we rarely struggle with sharpness with any of them. Sure, the corners might not be quite as tack sharp as the higher end counterparts, but for me, it's more about the compact, lightweight, sharp enough lenses. For Sony lenses, in terms of primes, I like the Sony 35mm f1.8. In terms of 50 and 85, I like the Samyang versions. So that's the 50mm f1.4 from Samyang and the 85mm f1.4 from Samyang. There, of course, are more expensive options, but I think those are great in terms of balancing that budget and sharpness. For a mid-range zoom, I opt for the Sigma, the 24 to 70 f2.8 DG-DN version 2. The version 1 is also good and will be a little bit cheaper. For a telephoto zoom for Sony, I like the Sony 70 to 200mm f4 G lens version 2. All right, let's talk Canon. For primes, I like the Canon 35mm f1.8. In terms of telephoto prime, I like the 85mm f2. Again, these lenses are less expensive than their f1.4 counterparts, but they're still great quality. In terms of Canon RF mount, there aren't as many budget zoom lenses available. And that's one of the reasons that we choose to go with the Sony camera system. But hopefully Canon will continue to add some over time. I'm gonna hand it back to Brenda for some more tips on getting sharp photos.
Number 5, stabilize your camera for maximum detail. Even the best lens will struggle if you're not keeping your camera steady. So use that tripod for long exposures. This is essential for landscapes, astrophotography, and studio shots when you have the time and ability to maximize stability for maximum detail. Turn off image stabilization when using a tripod. Some stabilization systems can actually introduce blur when mounted. I've never experienced this personally, but it's definitely something to keep in mind if you're having issues. And then use proper handheld technique. Brace your elbows in, press the shutter gently, and breathe out slowly when taking the shot. Number 6, sharpen smartly in post-processing. Even if you get everything right in camera, a little sharpening in post can make a big difference. Shoot in RAW, because JPEGs lose fine detail due to compression, and then sharpen selectively in Lightroom. Increase sharpness, but don't overdo it or you'll introduce noise. And use masking to avoid sharpening the whole image, just sharpen the subject. Having things that are supposed to be sharp sharpened makes the whole image look sharper and more impactful. And number 7, test your lens for sharpness issues. If you feel like you're doing everything else right and you think your lens might be soft, here's how to check. Use a test chart. Print a focus chart and shoot at different apertures to see your lens's sharpest setting. Check for decentering. Shoot a flat object straight on and compare sharpness across the frame. Soft corners might indicate a misaligned lens element. We had some lens calibration issues at one point, and it was tricky to diagnose. We ended up sending our lenses to Canon to have them all professionally checked. Both Canon and Sony have pro support, which we definitely utilize for cleanings, repairs, and technical support. The roughly $100 per year annual fee is definitely worth it, and anyone can join. You don't have to be a professional. Another thing that has helped me is that I'll use the metadata in Lightroom to help identify any patterns or trends when it comes to sharpness or any other issues that I'm having. If you can identify which camera or which lens is consistently giving you problems, that's helpful information. Or maybe you learn that it's whenever you're shooting backlit or fast action or some other trend that will help you know why you're having sharpness issues. So in conclusion, getting sharp photos isn't always about having the most expensive lens. It's about using your gear the right way. Which of these tips helped you the most? Or what questions do you still have? Drop a comment below and we'll get back to you. This sharpness series was a result of one of your comments, so we are definitely listening, just not to the haters. Next up, head back and check out the first video in this sharpness series, and I'll see you over there.